Seniors, colleagues, and friends, a very good evening to all of you. A warm welcome to our first webinar of our tenure. Year 2020 was spent as a year of learning how to survive with online classes and online webinars. So this year was expected to turn out to be better. But with the advent of second wave of COVID surge, this year also seems to go online till the situation improves. Our topic of discussion for today is nothing new, but definitely the most encountered in our routine activities. That is polycystic ovarian disease. One in every 10 women in India has polycystic ovarian disease. The rampant rise in the case of PCOD has led to inquisitiveness regarding newer guidelines, change of protocol in terms of management. Saharanpur Obs and Gynae Society, under the leadership of Dr. Neelam Garg, IVF specialist and laparoscopist, along with scientific team Dr. Vinita Malhotra and Pooja Khanna ma'am, would like to welcome you all and our guest speaker for today, Dr. Sangeeta Rai. I would also like to thank Acumentis for organizing this webinar on behalf of SOGS. So today we have Dr. Sangeeta Rai ma'am. Dr. Sangeeta Rai ma'am, MS Obs Gynae, is professor in the Department of Gynae, Banaras Hindu University. I welcome you, ma'am. Pursuing MS Obs Gynae from Kolkata Medical College, she has settled in Varanasi. Presently, she is Secretary Vox, Joint Scientific Secretary of Varanasi Menopause Society. She has more than 50 publications in international and national journals. She has been a speaker at many state and national level conferences. She has more than 50 publications as well. She has written chapters in book regarding postpartum depression and HPV infection. Her field of interest being adolescent health, infertility, and minimal access surgery. Now I would like our President Ma'am, Dr. Neelam Garg, to preside over the meeting.
Good evening, everyone. On behalf of Saharanpur Obs and Gynae Society, I welcome Dr. Sangeeta Rai, and I also welcome other members and other society members who are attending this seminar. So today we are going to discuss about PCOS. PCOS, you know, it is not a disease, it is a syndrome of continuous presentations. PCOS is a disease that starts from the womb right to the tomb. So it does not only manifest in the form of menstrual irregularity, it also affects the physical appearance, the mental status, and also has long-term sequelae. So today, I welcome Dr. Sangeeta Rai, who would be telling us about PCOS. And after a deliberation, we are going to discuss some practical aspects and some problems that we face daily in our clinical practice, because PCO is never to be completely treated, as we find. Thank you, everyone. Welcome, Dr. Sangeeta Rai, for your talk. I think we cannot hear Dr. Sangeeta's voice.
Yes, ma'am. Now audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Hello. Yeah.
Yeah. It's fine.
Thank you all the senior members and all the members of Saharanpur Obstetrics and Gynae Society for my kind introduction. Yes, we are going for an online presentation because it's a time of COVID, and yet we have to share our knowledge because as ma'am has said that PCOS is yes still an enigma because of its complex pathophysiology, and it affects all the age group. So we have to discuss about this because many of the adolescents are coming with the problems, and when you go over the investigations we are confused, and then how to proceed, how to counsel, and how to manage. Yes, it's a real complex problems. So let us discuss what is PCOS and how you manage this polycystic ovarian syndrome. Yes, we all know that it is a multifactorial and polygenic condition, and it is one of the most common endocrine disorder in the women of reproductive age group. Yeah,
You have not shared your screen.
I have shared my screen. Is it
It is not visible, ma'am.
okay? It was visible. Yes.
Not
Let me check. Let me check. I think it's
It is
okay now.
visible now, ma'am. Yeah.
Yeah. So PCOS is a multifactorial polygenic condition, and it is one of the most common endocrine
आवाज चली गई आवाज चली गई
We lost you, ma'am.
Look.
know that this is described by diagnosed and managed. But we all know that in Indian scenario, our Indian patients, Indian girls, they are very much different from others. So we all know that this is a complex endocrine problem and this has multifactorial etiology and they all presents with oligomenorrhea or an amenorrhea, hirsutism, obesity, polycystic ovaries, and the incidence is 0.5 to 4% among the infertile women and 20 to 30% it affects the young reproductive age group. So coming to the diagnostic criteria, as already I have told that many of the societies, they came to a single meeting and many of the criteria has been put down, like in case of ESHRE and ASRM guidelines, we know that any two of the three, like oligo or anovulation or biochemical or clinical features of hyperandrogenism and in ultrasound, polycystic ovaries, excluding the other pathophysiology. So if we are diagnosing 2 out of 3, yes, it is a PCOS, but still some of these factors may not fulfill and yet the patient may have PCOS. So we have to be very, very much methodical in diagnosing these cases. So coming to the different phenotypes of PCOS, we all know that there are 4 types of phenotypes and the type A is the classical PCOS where we get hyperandrogenism
There is a disturbance.
ovulatory dysfunction. Why this problem again and again?
Maybe your
It's
network.
better now. It's better.
Hello, am I better?
Yeah, it's better. Yeah, better.
Yeah. So in type C, there is hyperandrogenism with PCOS picture, but with normal ovulations. And type D is very milder forms. There was no hyperandrogenism, but yes, the patient present with anovulatory dysfunction and with ultrasound picture of PCOS. So because why they have given the phenotypes? Because depending on the phenotype, we go through the management. And the mild and the major, the severity will be diagnosed depending upon the phenotype. So type A and B is more severe form and type C and D is much less severe form. So coming to the pathophysiology, I will not go into the details of pathophysiology, but yes, we should know the small part of it because it helps in our management. So again, I am telling you the exact pathophysiology is not clearly understood till date. The component of hypothalamic pituitary axis, yes, it may plays a major role. The critical point is the androgen axis and hirsutism, which results in anovulation. And yes, the insulin resistance and obesity also acts in patients with PCOS. And there are long-term consequences of this. So this is not a short-term problem. This is a long-term problem which affects every age of the life. So we have to counsel the woman throughout her life so that they do not get into some problems. So this picture, it can show you the hypothalamus pituitary ovarian compartment. We know that if there's a hypothalamus and when there's a ovulation, when the menarche comes, there's an increase in frequency of GnRH and which increases the sensitivity of the pituitary to release the LH and FSH, more of LH, and then there is an increase in LH and decrease FSH ratio, and this leads to increase in estradiol, increase in androgens, and then this is a complex vicious cycle. So increase in LH pulse frequency is more predominant in these patients. So there is a neuroendocrinal modulation in these patients. And the theca cells and granulosa cells, they are more sensitive to LH receptors. So they are more producing LH and they are more sensitized. So there's more local androgen production, and this local androgen production inhibits the further secretion of the estrogen. So this is the vicious cycle which regulates at this compartment. So decrease in the hypothalamic dopamine or opioid inhibition of pulsatile GnRH secretion or abnormalities in the steroid hormone feedback. There is an increased GnRH pulse frequency, and thus increased pulse frequency of LH results in tonically elevated levels of LH. So there is no LH surge in these patients, and there is no maturation of the oocytes, and thus this leads to anovulated cycles. So FSH level not increased due to negative feedback effect of chronically elevated estrogen and the follicular inhibin. Coming to the androgen axis, which is an integral part of this problem, there's abnormal regulation of the androgen forming enzyme. That is, we all know that 17 hydroxylase P450, and this cause excess production of androgen from the ovaries and the adrenals. So we all know that principal source of androgen, they are the ovary, the adrenal, and the systemic metabolic alterations. So again, this picture describes you the formation of the androgens, the testosterone pathway we all know. I'm not going into detail, but we know that from the androgen, it is converted into the estrogen by the aromatase. So defective aromatization of the androgens to estrogen, because what happens if this androgen axis, because of the persistent increase in the LH, so there's increase in the local production of LH and increase in the androgens. So what does androgen cause? In excess, it forms 5-alpha androgens, and this 5-alpha androgens causes inhibitory of effect on the aromatization of the androgens to estrogens. So again, there is androgen increase and all the problems. And also there is a stimulation of the theca cells by the insulin-like growth factor 1. Adrenals, there is a stress, and then P450C17 enzyme hyperfunction, which also causes increase in the production of the androgens. Coming to the systemic metabolic alterations, we all know there is hyperinsulinemia. It is one of the key factor which causes hyperandrogenism. But we know that there's two type of PCOS, the obese and non-obese. So in case of obese PCOS, there is more of hyperinsulinemia than in case of non-obese PCOS. And this causes stimulation of the theca cells, and insulin results in more free insulin-like growth factor 1, which stimulates further the theca cells. So insulin inhibits hepatic synthesis of serum sex hormone binding globulin, and thus results in more free level of the androgen. So this is a very complex path. We all know that the insulin resistance, hyperinsulinemia, and the LH axis, they act as a primary problem for all this pathway, and we have to understand, because different patients will have different pathophysiology. So understanding this pathophysiology by different investigations and the proper history, and then we can manage these patients in the long run very nicely. So again, in these patients, there's increased sensitivity of theca cells, as I have told you, than in the normal patients. And insulin potentiates the action of LH, both acting synergistically to stimulate the androgen production. So we can see the ovary, there's increase in LH stimulation, there's a decrease in aromatization, there's increase in insulin, increase in all the androgens like androstenedione, testosterone, increase in insulin-like growth factor, and there's enzymatic dysregulation. So though multifactorial problems are running at the ovarian level, and which causes PCOS-like picture. So anovulation, yes, the premature activation of the LH-mediated terminal differentiation of granulosa cells, and this results in the growth arrest. The granulosa cells of dominant follicle, that is 10 millimeter, becomes responsive to LH at mid-follicular phase and triggers terminal differentiation, resulting in multiple small follicular cysts. And defective FSH induced aromatization of the androgens to estrogen. So more androgenic microenvironment. LH level is tonically elevated without any LH surge. So here we can see that ovary, there is a decrease in FSH, which acts on granulosa cells, and there is increase in LH, which acts on theca cell stroma, which increases androgen. And in decrease in FSH, so there is no LH surge and there is anovulation. Coming to the insulin resistance and obesity, 35% of the women exhibit impaired glucose tolerance and 7 to 10% meet criteria for type 2 diabetes. Yet it is one of the important problem in these patients because it is basically a metabolic syndrome, and 25 to 50% of the women PCOS have no demonstrable insulin resistance. And this is again a complex pathway. We can see that there is normal insulin in patients, how they act by phosphorylation of the insulin receptors. And in case of hyperinsulinemic non-responder like PCOS, there is a problem in this pathway and increased secretion of the free fatty acids. So obesity is a common feature of women with PCOS, and the visceral obesity that is more important. So overall prevalence of obesity in women with PCOS varies among the different population, and in USA 60% of the women with PCOS they are obese. So intra-abdominal obesity, which results in visceral obesity, which because it is more metabolically active, and lipolysis result in more free fatty acids and cytokines that are inflammatory mediators, TNF alpha, interleukin 6, leptin and resistance, and which increases the serine phosphorylation and inhibit the insulin signaling, and this results in insulin resistance. So what are the long-term consequences? We all know all the problems of type 2 diabetes mellitus, dyslipidemia, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, endometrial cancer, and obstetric sleep apnea. So coming to the presentations, what are the different presentations? So presentation is varied depend upon the adolescent, reproductive, perimenopausal or menopausal thing. But yes, they may have a common presentations like menstrual abnormality in the form of oligomenorrhea or amenorrhea, which occurs in 70% of these patients. Obesity, yes, abdominal obesity in obese PCOS is more common. Infertility in reproductive age group, hirsutism and acne because of the increased androgens and metabolic syndromes, acanthosis nigricans because of the increased androgens and increase in insulin. There's a specific skin changes due to insulin resistance, and because insulin there's insulin resistance in the PCOS, but in some organs like the skin and the ovaries, there's no insulin resistance. So here what happens, the skin is thickened and becomes pigmented and becomes velvety, gray and brown in color. And the affected area is the nape of the neck, the inner thighs, groin, and the axilla. And typical one of the presentation is hair and syndrome, which is hyperandrogenism, insulin resistance, and acanthosis nigricans is found in some of the patients. Coming to the menstrual irregularities. So the PCOS evidence-based guidelines 2018 has defined that in adolescents, what are the presentation in menstrual diary that will characterize that yes, we have to suspect these patients as a PCOS, because the cycles may be very much differ in these patients. So they have said that in these patients, the irregular menstrual cycles are defined as a normal in the first year post-menarche as a part of the pubertal transition, and greater than 1 to less than 3 years post-menarche, the cycle should not be less than 21 days or greater than 45 days. And if the patient is greater than 3 years post-menarche to menopause, cycle less than 21 days or greater than 35 days, or if she is menstruating less than 8 cycles per year, yes, she has menstrual irregularities. Greater than 1 year post-menarche or greater than 90 days for any one of this cycle. So primary amenorrhea by age 15 or greater than 3 years post-thelarche, that is the breast development, yes, we have to do the proper investigations to manage these patients. Coming to the hyperandrogenism, we often find this a common problem and common presentations in these patients, and is very difficult to manage sometimes. So how they present: the acne, alopecia, hoarse voice, hair loss, clitoral enlargement, reduction in the breast size, and hirsutism. And we all know that hirsutism, excess male pattern facial and the body hair, and this is due to the increase in the adrenal and the ovarian androgens, which converts the vellus hair to the terminal hair, the male pattern type. And only terminal hair need to be considered. And we all know that we can characterize in the visual scale by the Ferryman-Galloway score. And if it is greater than 25, it is severe. Level 4 to 6 indicates hirsutism. So what are the different areas? I am not going into details. We all know that. But yes, we have to see the pattern and we have to do the visual scale marking and scoring. And we can see from the picture the different sites where we have to see the hirsutism and do the scoring. Coming to the metabolic syndrome, yes, the 3 of the 5 qualify the syndrome, that is abdominal obesity, waist circumference greater than 88 centimeter or 35 inches, the triglycerides level greater than 150 milligram per dl, HDL cholesterol less than 50, blood pressure greater than 130 by 85, fasting blood sugar between 110 to 126 milligram per dl, and 2 hour postprandial from oral glucose tolerance test. The level should be 150, 140 to 199 milligram per dl to diagnose this metabolic syndrome. Chronic anovulation commonly exhibit insulin resistance and the other risk factors for the development of type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease. The elevated androgen levels predispose to dyslipidemia, which is the most common metabolic abnormality, and hyperinsulinemia with hypertension and elevated level of PAI, TPA, and urokinase, thereby inhibiting the fibrinogen levels. So it also increases the coagulation problems. Coming to the PCOS in adolescents, as I have told you, every age group is affected. So what the problems the adolescent present with? The menstrual irregularities, as I have described, the most common presentation, and it is along with the insulin resistance, which is a usual features of normal puberty. Difference between a multifollicular appearance and polycystic ovarian morphology is difficult to define here because in adults and we know that the hypothalamic pituitary axis is not mature. So they have anovulatory cycles. And when you do the ultrasound, they are multifollicular pattern. And again in PCOS, the same pattern. So in these patients, the ultrasound is not advised because it will give a misdiagnosed picture. The mild hair growth can also be considered normal, so progressive hirsutism is the most important finding for clinical hyperandrogenism. The acne, alopecia, they are not considered as a marker in adolescents. Premature puberty, if any adolescent have a premature puberty before 8 years of age, this may be early sign of PCOS. Coming to the physiological peripubertal hyperinsulinemia, there is increase in the growth hormone levels. Coming to the PCOS in reproductive age group, again the menstrual cycles become regular with age in women with PCOS caused by follicular loss, both in number and the volume through ovarian aging. Because we have sometimes seen that when a patient is coming at 35 years of age, she may have PCOS, but now her cycles becomes more regular because of the depletion of the follicles. Okay, this is important to understand. And the production of the androgens may decrease because of the ovarian aging or decreased production by the adrenal glands over time. In postmenopausal and perimenopausal women, basically in postmenopausal, there is persistence of PCOS can be considered likely with the continuing evidence of hyperandrogenism because of the peripheral conversion. And a diagnosis of PCOS postmenopause could be considered if there is a past diagnosis of PCOS, a long-term history of irregular menstrual cycle, and hyperandrogenism and or PCOM during the reproductive years. So every age can be affected. So we have to do the proper history taking and examinations in these patients. Postmenopausal women presenting with a new onset severe or worsening hyperandrogenism, including hirsutism, require further investigations to rule out androgen secreting tumors and ovarian hypertrichosis. But yes, before jumping out to the diagnosis of PCOS, we have to exclude the other androgen excess disorder. And the most common we all know that is thyroid disorder, hyperprolactinemia, and non-classical late onset congenital adrenal hyperplasia, deficiency of the enzymatic pathway 21 hydroxylase and 11 beta hydroxylase, present in childhood or early adolescent, precocious puberty and signs of hyperandrogenism, any other drug intake, yes, important, and follicular phase morning 17 hydroxyprogesterone concentration. If it is more than 800 nanogram per dl, then yes, it is due to some other cause, not as a case of PCOS. Basically, it occurs in non-classical congenital adrenal hyperplasia. Coming to the androgen secreting ovarian and adrenal tumors, which is very rare presentation, but the most important finding is the patient develops the hirsutism and signs of virilization very frequently in very short span of 1 or 2 months, very rapidly, which is not occurs in patient with PCOS. And if you do the serum testosterone concentration, it will be greater than not even 150, it should be greater than 200 nanogram per dl. And by transvaginal sonography and adrenal CT, we can see the problem. Coming to the Cushing syndrome, yes, prevalence is below 1%. Excess of adrenal cortisol secretion and can be ACTH dependent, which may be due to pituitary tumor, or ACTH dependent adrenal adenoma, which is a primary. Severe fatigue, muscle weakness, easy bruising, purple striae on the back, hyperpigmentation, obesity, they are the markers which can differentiate between the PCOS. Overnight dexamethasone suppression test as an ideal test to differentiate between this Cushing syndrome and the PCOS. Coming to the idiopathic hirsutism, the hirsutism accompanied by a normal ovulatory and menstrual function in the absence of hyperandrogenism. The prevalence is 5 to 7%, and here there is an increase in the peripheral 5 alpha reductase activity. So, test of ovulation differentiate women with PCOS. Severe insulin resistance syndrome. We know that there are three types. Type A is due to defect in the insulin receptor. Type B is autoimmune disorder affecting the insulin receptors. And type C is, as I have described, hair end syndrome. So this is very rare, but yes, insulin resistance can cause hirsutism. Now, all the things we know that what are the different cause of hyperandrogenism and hyperinsulinemia. So we have to exclude the different causes by the proper history and then coming to the examinations. So examination is very much important in these patients. So we start with the vitals measurement, the blood pressure, the pulse, and the degree of hydration of the patients. The height, weight, BMI is very much integral part of this physical examination. Obesity, whether it is android or gynecoid, the abdominal fat, we have to measure the waist hip ratio, very much important. In most of these patients, the fat is accumulated at the hip and the abdomen, lower part of the abdomen, but the thigh region and the legs is very, very thin. The extremities are thin. So this is a classical pattern in case of obese PCOS. Secondary sexual characters, we have to characterize it depending upon the scoring system, the breast development, and yes, to rule out the hyperprolactinemia, the galactorrhea, we have to check bilaterally. Acne, acanthosis nigricans, temporal balding, hirsutism, and collateral enlargement should be seen and noted. Now, coming to the investigations, very important. As I've already told you, that in post-menarche, up to 8 years post-menarche, the ultrasound is not recommended in adolescent girls because we get a mixed picture. We cannot differentiate between the small multiple follicles, which is common in this group, from the PCOS. But in post-menarche, then 8 years, then we have to go for the sonography, presence of 12 or more follicles 2 to 9 millimeter of diameter, and or ovarian volume greater than 10 milliliter in at least one ovary is our diagnostic. Using endovaginal ultrasound transducers with a frequency bandwidth that includes 8 megahertz, the threshold of PCOS should be on either ovary. A follicle number per ovary now it is greater than 20 or ovarian volume greater than 10 milliliter, ensuring no corpus lutea, cyst or dominant follicles. So this is the recent guidelines, and we have, when you send these patients to exclude by the ultrasound, we have to tell the radiologist you have to measure with the high resolution probe, and per ovary you have to count the number of the follicles. The ovarian volume is very much important. Otherwise, they just simply give the finding that it is a PCOM picture, and again we are confused. If we are using older technology, the threshold of PCOM, we know that could be an ovarian volume greater than 10 ml on either ovary. In patients with irregular menstrual cycles and hyperandrogenism, an ovarian ultrasound is not necessarily, as I have told you, for PCOS diagnosis. However, ultrasound will identify the complete PCOS phenotype. As I have told you, ABCD phenotype. Coming to the investigations, yes, investigations is a backbone for the diagnosis. And we all know that if the patient is not menstruating, we have to go for the urine for pregnancy test, because pregnancy should be excluded, and then let the patient withdrawal bleed. And when the patient is given progesterone, we have to wait for the withdrawal bleed, and on day 2 to day 3, we have to go for the serum values of LH and FSH. Normally, in these patients, LH level is markedly elevated, which is greater than 10 ml and milli international unit per ml, and FSH is low, and the ratio is reversed. It is at least greater than 2:1. The estrol and estradiol levels is not markedly raised. It is very close to the normal or just slightly elevated, greater than 30. Serum TSH is very much important because it also causes anovulation. Serum prolactin measurement should be there. Free testosterone, important. Serum hormone binding globulin, it should be less than 15 nanomole per liter. All the other androgens, androstenedione, free androgen index, serum AMH is very much important. But yes, serum AMH cannot diagnose the PCOS. It is helpful when you are going to do the investigations in an infertile patients. So we have to do the ovarian reserve. But for the diagnosis of PCOS, AMH is not the ideal. The other important blood test to rule out the insulin resistance and the metabolic syndrome, that is to our oral glucose tolerance test. We have to do it. And the lipid profile, which should be done fasting. And the fasting serum insulin concentration, if it is greater than 20 to 30 micro unit per ml, it is important. And fasting glucose insulin ratio less than 4.5, because we know that these are the investigations, but yes, all of the investigations are not available everywhere. So we have to rely in some basic investigations and do the proper history and examinations, because they have a very different lab to lab variations in everything. So we have to go for basic investigations and then do the proper management. Coming to the other specific investigations, we know that in case of perimenopausal and postmenopausal women, there is unopposed estrogen stimulation because of the anovulation. So endometrial sampling is a must. Morning follicular phase serum 17 hydroxyprogesterone in women with pre or perimenarchal onset of hirsutism, family history of congenital adrenal hyperplasia or high risk ethnicity, we have to go for it. Overnight dexamethasone suppression test. We always refer these patients to a endocrinology unit to do the proper investigations. The HOMA-IR, that is homeostatic model assessment of insulin resistance, widely prescribed in every book in larger epidemiological studies, but we are not using it. It is a product of fasting glucose and the insulin by 405, and values greater than 3.2 to 3.9 indicates insulin resistance. Many other tests are there to see the insulin sensitivity and resistance. They are all theoretical. Coming to the management of the woman with PCOS should seek to correct or prevent both its immediate and long-term clinical consequences, which may include menstrual abnormalities, hyperandrogenism, infertility, increased risk for developing endometrial hyperplasia and neoplasia, increased risk for developing type 2 diabetes, and increased risk for developing cardiovascular disease. So everything should keep in mind. You have to follow a young girl till her menopause, because she can develop any problem through any phase of her life. So we have to thoroughly investigate and follow up these patients. So management are different, as I have told you. When a patient present in adolescents, patient presenting with infertility, without infertility, and elderly patients. So overall measurement, we all know management, we all know that yes, lifestyle modification, it is a very boring thing to advise. All of the patient, we are very get depressed that ma'am, how to do this lifestyle modifications, I'm not going to lose weight even if I'm eating nothing. But believe me, giving 10 to 15 minutes to these patients, proper counseling, and telling them yes, even if you're not losing weight, but your pathophysiology will be better, means that insulin resistance will be much better, and you have all the problems like menstrual irregularities and metabolic problems will become less, even if your weight is not decreasing. So you have to proper counsel the patients. And yes, obese patients, they have to decrease the weight. Even a 5 to 10% decrease in weight will affect a long way in curtailing these symptoms. Dietary modifications, yeah, we have to refer these patients to a proper dietitian. And exercise, very much important. Weight reduction exercise, aerobic, both anaerobic is important. Coming to the medical management, which we all obstetricians are dealing with, the most common drug we are using is OCP, containing both estrogen and the progesterone, ovulation inducing drugs in infertile patients, and insulin sensitizing agent. But yes, we do sometimes overuse this insulin sensitizing agent. So every patient we should not use and we will discuss it. The surgical wedge resection or laparoscopic ovarian drilling, it is very rarely used nowadays, and in some of the patient, it has a scope. Specific management of hirsutism, specific management of infertility, and the therapies of minoxidil, we know that. Lifestyle changes, yes, preferably multi-component diet, exercise, behavioral strategies, which should be specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. And that goal should be set and self-monitored. Weight reduction, I already told you, significant improvement occurs if there's a mild 2 to 5% reduction in weight and metabolic and reproductive function. And because weight loss increases serum hormone binding globulin concentration and also improves the ovulatory functions. So it breaks the chain of that vicious cycle. Behavioral strategies, because most of these adolescents or reproductive age women, they are very much depressed because they are not like other young girls. They are beautiful, they are very different. Their body physique, the hirsutism make their appearance very different, so that self-esteem is lost. Okay, so their behavioral problems may be there. So we have to counsel these patients very nicely. Goal settings, self monitoring, stimulus control, problem solving, assertiveness training, the slower aging, reinforcing changes by close follow up, prevention of relapse, and to optimize the weight management by healthy lifestyle and emotional well-being should be taken care of in these patients. Coming to the dietary advice, yes, energy deficit of 30%, that means decrease in the 500 to 750 kilocalorie per day in obese women. Exercise, very much important, because in adults age 18 to 16 years, a minimum of 150 per minute week of moderate intensity physical activity or 75 minutes per week of vigorous intensity, including muscle strengthening activities, or 2 consecutive days per week. In adolescents, at least 60 minutes of moderate to vigorous intensity physical activity per day, including those that strengthen the muscle and bone, at least 3 times weekly. An activity should be performed in at least 10 minutes bouts or around 1000 steps, aiming to achieve at least 30 minutes in different ways. So this is PCOS 2018 guidelines, and yes, we have to give stress on the exercise, because this fat, we have to break the chain. Now, coming to the combined oral contraceptive pills, both the estrogen and the progesterone should be a part of your treatment, because progesterone suppresses the LH and estrogen improves the SHBG, which reduces the free testosterone level. And less androgenic progesterones like norgestimate, desogestrel, drospirenone should be used in these patients, which regularize the menstrual cycle and attenuate the endometrial growth. Metformin, yes, which is very commonly used by most of the obstetricians and endocrinologists. And what is it? It is a second generation biogonide, which increases the insulin sensitivity by activating glucose transporter, that is GLU24. It inhibits the hepatic glucose production and causes reduction in the free fatty acid concentration, which helps in reducing the gluconeogenesis. It acts at the hypothalamic level or the AMPK pathway, which helps in the modulation of the LH secretions. It also decreases in the IGF-1 level, and thus it improves the body weight in obese PCOS both directly and indirectly. Coming to the anti-androgens, and we all know they are spironolactone, cyproterone acetate, flutamide, and finasteride, and we are using in most of the patient depending upon the degree of hirsutism. The dose we all know. Coming to the inositol and its isomers, the myoinositol and dechiroinositol have insulin mimetic properties, and these bound to glycophosphatidylate inositol and inositol phosphoglycan that acts as a second messenger of insulin. So inositol in any form should currently be considered as an experimental therapy in PCOS. So coming to the management, lifestyle modifications, combined oral contraceptive pills with less androgenic progesterones. We should not start anti-androgen containing pills from the beginning. We start with the low dose OCP and most probably drospirenone containing, which reduces the weight, doesn't increase the weight in obese patients. And if there's amenorrhea, yes, withdrawal bleeding with medroxyprogesterone acetate before starting any contraceptive pills. Metformin should not be started in any adolescents Only indication is with the BMI greater than 25 kg per meter square, where combined OCP or lifestyle changes do not achieve the desired goals. So we have to start this COCP, lifestyle, dietary changes, modification, everything for 3 to 6 months. And even after that, we are not achieving the goal, then we can add metformin. But yes, if the patient has a clear cut picture of insulin resistance on investigations or a family history of diabetes, then we can add metformin in these patients. Always start with the low dose, that is 500 milligram, because you know that metformin has got side effects. Renal function test should be done before starting the metformin, and start in the night, because all the nausea, the bloating sensation, the headache will be less, and increment it weekly. Hirsutism, for this, we have to start with the low dose COCP along with the anti-androgens. And after 6 months or more of COCP and cosmetic therapy have failed, then we can start with the anti-androgens. And also we can start some of the temporary or permanent method for hair removal. Infertility, yes, the reduction is weight is the primary management, which is followed by the ovulation induction. We are now well used with this letrozole, which is aromatase inhibitors. It is the first line pharmacological treatment for ovulation induction in these women with anovulatory infertility. The dose we all know that it starts with 2.5 milligram to 7.5 milligram from day 3 to day 7. Clomiphene citrate is also it is selective estrogen receptor modulator. If it is not acting in 1 or 2 cycles, we can add metformin for ovulation induction, whose BMI is greater than 30 kg per meter square. But we know that clomiphene citrate has a side effect because it causes thinning of the endometrium. The dose is 50 to 150 milligram for 5 days from day 2 to day 7. And also in these patients, clomiphene causes more in formation of the eggs. So over or hyperstimulation is more common if we are using clomiphene citrate. Yes, gonadotropins not should not be used if there is no IVF setup, because we know the problems with the gonadotropins. It is used only when the oral ovulation induction therapy has failed. And yes, the laparoscopic ovarian drilling, the treatment option only in those patients when you have tried for 6 cycles of ovulation induction, either with clomiphene or letrozole, or the patient is hyperandrogenic and still they are anovulating. In these patients, we can go for laparoscopic ovarian drilling. And here what we do the electrocautery and the rule of 4. That is 4 puncture, which is of 4 millimeter, 4 current, 4 watt we have to use. That is important because we should not deplete the ovarian follicles. So AMH before and after doing the laparoscopic ovarian drilling is also indicated. And if the patient is not desiring the fertility, you have to go for the management of the abnormal uterine bleeding, as we do in the protocols. Endometrial hyperplasia is will with the endometrial sampling, and most of this pattern will be proliferative endometrium in histopathology. So we give the combined OCP in these patients. Coming to the metabolic abnormalities and the health risk, yes, regular monitoring for the weight changes, blood pressure in these patients should be measured annually or more frequently based on the global cardiovascular risk. Metformin can be given in these patients. In adolescents, combination of low dose metformin and anti-androgen. In young women, yes, metformin with COCP, and yes, statins, that is the HMG co-reductase inhibitor in women with PCOS at risk of developing diabetes and cardiovascular disease. We can start prophylactically in 10 milligram dose. So with this, the take-home message is it is a heterogeneous condition which is characterized by menstrual irregularity, hyperandrogenism, and polycystic ovaries. There's increase in the LH levels leading to anovulation, excess of androgen production, insulin resistance, and hyperinsulinemia. And we should exclude the other problems of androgen excess. Lifestyle modifications, weight reduction is an integral part of the management. Combine OCP, regularize the menstrual cycles, and we should know the long-term consequences and deal these patients according to the presentations. Thank you so much for your patient hearing.
Thank you, Dr. Sangeeta. It was indeed a great deal of good information. PCOS is such an enigma that every time we hear more about it, the more we get confused. And when we do look about it in practical, the more patients there are, the more we find ourselves entangled in the continuous problem which never solves itself. You said from the in utero part to the menopause, it continues. So I've made a slide share of a few slides which includes the problems suggested by our members which they face in daily lives regarding PCOD patients, and many of them must have been answered by you, but since it's such a vast thing, so I think we could revise a few of things that recur one by one and even share new things. I would request the members, if they want to share any of their opinions, they can unmute themselves as required. Can I share my screen now?
Yes, I have stopped here.
Okay.
Ma'am, you can share your screen.
Okay, fine. Can you see my screen?
No, ma'am.
It's coming. You cannot start screen share while other participant is sharing. I think Dr. Sangeeta, can you click the button stop sharing on the top?
I have
Ma'am
stopped
has
this.
already stopped it.
I have stopped.
Okay, fine. Is anybody else sharing?
No, ma'am. No one is sharing.
Okay, I'll just click it.
Neela ma'am, you can start the questionnaire directly.
Okay, fine. Can you now see my screen?
Yes, we are trying to see, but it's not showing anything.
Ma'am, is there any network issue? Yeah, ma'am. It's
Yeah.
it's
I
opening.
think it's
Yes.
come now. Now you can see it.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. You can put it on a slideshow mode.
Okay.
And just close this window.
How to close the upper part?
Yeah. Yes, yes.
You press F5. It will be full
F5
screen.
also, ma'am. You can press. Just press
Press what?
F5.
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 F5. Ma'am, it is there on keyboard. F5.
And I'll start the slideshow. Okay, now is it visible?
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, fine. Let's start with PCOS queries. The first one, what are the conditions that mimic PCOS? Let me start with a case. A girl comes to me with hirsutism, severe hirsutism, acne, and menstrual irregularities. And there is another girl that comes to me with normal regular menstruation and she has acne and hirsutism. Am I going to investigate the girl on same lines, or am I going to think of two different things?
What is the age exactly? What is the age of presentation?
The girl is an adolescent.
Yeah.
Am I going to think that the girl has normal menstrual cycles, and since she has acne and hirsutism, she could be a case of ovarian or androgen secreting tumor because she has normal menstrual cycles? So should I get a whole PCOD profile done, or should I mainly concentrate on the investigation that look out for an ovarian or adrenal tumor?
No, if you have to, if you are suspecting a severe degree of hirsutism, then only you have to do all the investigations. Mild
Yeah.
hirsutism and acne, it is very common in this adolescent age group. That is very much physiological. So then investigation is not required. Yes, we have to follow these patients. Again, you have to see the family history. If the patient has a pubarc at the age of 8 years, they are high degree for getting PCOS. But yes, this small hirsutism and acne will not tell you to go on the major investigations. So I think that you have to go for the scoring, and if it is very mild, that nothing to do, just follow up. And if it is severe, more just I have till Ferryman Galloway scoring system, it is 24 or more, then you can do the adrenal gland CT scan and ovarian markers to see that yes, what is the cause, because yes, there may be a pathology that is lying behind.
Okay, fine. What is the battery of tests that I should get done in the first instance? Should we, apart from FSH, LS, TSH, prolactin, getting androstenedione, DHEAS, free and total testosterone, should all these things be done in this as a single battery of test in the one go?
No, you have to first do the basic test. Like we know that all the other problems of hyperandrogenism, they are very rare. So the most common cause we all know that is PCOS, hyperprolactinemia, some drug intake, or hypothyroidism. So these tests should be done first, or insulin resistance. So fasting blood sugar and 2-hour postprandial blood sugar, the lipid profile. And if we are catching these investigations any abnormal, then we can treat this. But if these are normal, then we can jump to the other, because you know that investigations are very costly and every patient
Yeah.
cannot afford everything. So just stepwise.
Okay,
Investigation is
testosterone and
important.
DHEAS, do they require any particular time of period or any particular time of the day that they give better reports?
Basically, this should be done in a morning sample and morning empty stomach, because there's a diurnal variations. So the morning sample around 9 to 10 o'clock is good to.
Okay. And period of time does not matter for the testosterone and
In
androstenedione.
this situation, period of time doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
Okay, right. Does any other member have any other question regarding the first query? Okay, coming with the next. What percentage of patients with hirsutism have elevated testosterone, DHEAS, and androstenedione? There are so many girls who are coming to us with hirsutism and acne, but they have normal levels of testosterone
Yeah,
and
yeah.
DHEAS.
So the problem is that when we are getting these girls, most of the girls are already getting treatment from outside practitioners, okay, for 2 months or 3 months or 6 months, okay, and they are now switching over to us. So what is the problem is that they are getting anti androgens containing OCP or OCP, so they are decreasing the testosterone levels. So we are when you are investigating these girls, the testosterone is normal. So when you stop this OCP and for 3 months, when everything hormone becomes level, the physiological thing, then we can correctly see that yes, these testosterone are really raised or not. Because most of the time we get these patients not as a first, second, or third referral in these cases. And yes, most of the cases, hirsutism, I do get cases which are mostly referred. The testosterone, DHA, or androstenedione are normal for these patients. So only LH-FSH ratio is variable in these patients. But yes, I do get, I think 90% of the patient I get normal testosterone level in patient with hirsutism. I think all of you. Any
Yeah,
variations?
yeah, yeah.
Nothing.
Okay, the next one. Which one should be done? Free testosterone or total testosterone? Somewhere I read that the method of doing testosterone also depends. A radio immunoassay should be asked for and not an ELISA test
Yes,
should.
yes. That is the lab variations, ma'am. Actually, we basically the idea is always free testosterone is the best.
Okay,
Okay, it will
yeah,
help you to
because
tell. Yes, we know that one nanogram per liter should be the normal range. If it is greater than that, that is a problem. It is increase in the circulation. Okay, but most of the lab doesn't measure the free testosterone, so we go with the total testosterone. So this is the problem
okay,
with the lab.
okay, right. Thank you for the information. Next, for the next question, Anushka, can you continue with the next question?
So, ma'am, the next question that we have is, if a normal patient comes to you with PCOD, that is, she's having irregular cycles.
Your voice is echoing, Anushri. Can you just repeat, beta? Somebody is telling your mic is on. Somebody else. Please mute your mic if you are not speaking.
Can you hear me now, ma'am?
Yeah, it's okay now.
So there is always a confusion as to when to give insulin and to which patients. So and the second question, of course, is are insulin levels really needed to give metformin?
Yes, very much important, because in those patients only who are obese and the problem of insulin resistance is there. So in these patients only the addition of metformin will help you. Or
Ma'am, but
in
we have to get fasting insulin done because
yeah,
it's an expensive one.
it
Not
is
all.
very much expensive. But the clinical finding, when you are giving the COs, combined OC pills, okay, and the dietary modifications and the weight loss, and even if after 3 to 6 months of your aggressive therapy and the patient is very much compliant, then you can add metformin with a low dose. But in the first line, you should never add metformin because it will do more harm than good to these patients.
So, what will be the first line investigations whenever we see a patient of PCOD? Even with regard to the testosterone, free testosterone, DHEAS, androstenedione, fasting insulin, OGTT, LH, FSH, just because not everybody can afford it. The treatment
Yes,
really remains the same that we have to put the patient on
yes,
OC
yes.
or
So
myvine.
basic is your LHFSH ratio. That is very much important, and the clinical or biochemical picture of hyperandrogenism. This is very much important. Even the ultrasound criteria is present or not. If these two are present and the fulfilling the criteria, you have to start the treatment.
So for
This is much important.
hyperandrogenism, only free testosterone is enough, or DHEAS or androstenedione is also required.
Because we know that if testosterone is increased, the chances of increase in these androstenedione or DHA will be there, because they are producing from the ovaries or the adrenals. Okay, but when we have to differentiate with the other problems like congenital adrenal hyperplasia or something other, then we can go for the DHEAS or 17 hydroxyprogesterone level. Otherwise, the total testosterone is enough.
Okay.
So if an obese adolescent comes to us with PCOS, until we demonstrate a higher level of fasting insulin, should we not start metformin with OCPs?
Yes, we can start, but in the first line, we start with all the lifestyle modifications, exercise, dietary changes, and then you can switch over to metformin after 3 months. At least try for 3 months without metformin, because we know that this lifestyle modifications, weight loss will decrease the insulin resistance. Because in every PCOS patient, we will not get the insulin resistance, because this is still an enigma. What is a pathophysiology? So every patient is different. So
How much
better
duration
do.
do we save to start a second line of treatment?
I think
Does it
in my practice, 3 to 6 months. 3 to 6 months, not more than 6 months. We should switch over to the second line if after 6 months you are not getting any result, satisfied result. So
But ma'am,
maximum is 6 months.
the patient compliance usually varies when they come. Every time they come on the second day of period, and we end up giving them the OC pills. For
Yeah,
them, it's like हर महीने तो same medicine दे दी है, change तो कुछ है नहीं. So
yeah.
do you have any specific just saying lifestyle modification, or
No,
rather
that is very much important. This is very boring to say lifestyle modification and exercise. Very boring, because I refer to them to the dietitian and endocrinologist, because we do in a teamwork. Because the patient has to get sensitized that where is she is lacking. And yes, if you get one or two patients of PCOS, let them sit together and talk. Then she will feel that she is not alone in this rat race. Okay, so the problems and how she is getting affected, this is very much important. But yes, we should not start the OCP when a patient comes to you on the day two. Let all the investigations come. Let the menstrual irregularity come. If she is bleeding heavily, then you have to control. But try to investigate the patient properly, so that when you start, it will be more effective. That should be our goal, I think.
Okay, the next slide, and I think is going to convey a lot of meaning. The slide says, is polycystic ovarian morphology?
I would like to interrupt.
Yeah.
Anupam would like to say something.
Yeah. I want to ask Sangeeta ma'am whether duration of treatment in adolescent and in reproductive age group to switch for switching to second line therapy same or either different.
No, in the infertility patients, we have to switch more frequently. Matlab not more than 3 months. The very much important. We cannot
And in
give.
adolescent, as I have read somewhere that we should wait at least 2 years to switch into second line therapy because
What recommendation? Where you have read? Because I am.
in Indian Fertility Society, I have read
2
that
years is very long, very long. I think maximum 6 months to 1 year. All the recommendations of PCOS
because
guidelines.
ma'am, adolescent, matlab we have to switch on metformin in adolescent age group. We should wait at least.
Yes. For metformin, yes. I am now again. I am telling metformin. We should not jump in every patient, है ना? Because
in
this is
adolescent,
very much side effects. So adolescent, the pathophysiology is very much different. The maturity of the axis, the obesity, the family history. So we have to get the time at least 2 or 3 years, and then we can start with some other drugs. So and these patients have time. Okay, they are more concerned with the menstrual irregularity sometimes or their look. So we can counsel them how to get rid with the hirsutism or acne, try these drugs. And then this is very much important because metformin is not a very good drug. The side effects are much more. So especially in adolescents, whenever you are starting, very much important, if she is very much obese, if it is the weight is greater than 80 kilo, the family history of obesity is there, or she is in a family history of type 2 diabetes, then you can add these drugs in an adolescent at 6 months. So every patient is different and you have to individualize every patient. Yeah.
Okay, the next slide is about polycystic ovarian morphology. And polycystic ovarian morphology, as you know, means the picture of polycystic ovaries we get on ultrasound.
Yeah.
So many times adolescent girls come to us with an ultrasound which says polycystic ovaries. So does that mean that we have to start treating PCOS?
No, never. No, not at all. I never see that ultrasound. Especially in these young adolescents, I never give a damn to this ultrasound picture. Yes, if any large ovary or any ovarian cyst which is greater than 6 to 10 centimeter, then yes, it's okay. Or if the patient is complaining of pain for abdomen, then it is, yes, important. Otherwise, it's just a PCOS morphology, because every radiologist will give you this morphologic picture. So when you need to know that, tell them that what are the probe you are using, what is the transducer, and what is the number, what is the size of the ovary, whether any cyst or there, you have to write it to them. Then they will say it nicely. Otherwise, this normal routine finding, it is not important at all. So we should not look at it, especially in young adolescents.
And furthermore, if the patient who's a young adolescent is within 1 to 1.5 years of her puberty, so we should give some time for the hypothalamo-physial axis to mature itself. Because in early pubertal girls, most of the time we are going to have found such a morphology on ultrasound every time, because she has so many follicles already which are stored there, right? So unless the patient complains of acne, hirsutism added, until then we should not suspect of PCOS, isn't it?
Yes. But again, in those girls, if you are finding that they are mensurating for 8 cycles in a year, then you need to follow up. There may be a component of PCOS. So yes, this will tell you that yes, you have to follow up these patients. That is
right.
also
There
not
was a slide, very
known.
good slide that you showed, that menarche less than 1 year, or cycles 21 or more than 35 days.
Yes. Very
so
much
that
important.
should be considered irregular after 2 to 3 years of having periods started.
Very much important.
In continuation of this, I want to ask if after menarche, if the girl has a period only once, and after that she doesn't have any periods, and moreover no sign on hormonal testing or ultrasound, there was no significant finding, then what should be the diagnosis and what should be the line of treatment of a young girl of age less than 16 year, 14 or 15 year?
Basically, in these girls, we have to rule out the problems first, the menstrual history, the family history, and what is our exact BMI. So we know that the PCOS is more common in obese because they are more insulin resistant. So we have to do investigate in these cases, especially in the line of hyperinsulinemia, and give the withdrawal medicines like medroxyprogesterone acetate, and then we have to treat them accordingly. But yes, we should not jump again to treat these girls. We have the time, they are young girls. Let the investigations be proper, and the counseling of weight reduction and exercise lifestyle modifications, and that will help more in patient with obese. But yes, lean PCOS, they are very difficult to treat because we know that insulin resistance is not that likely in case of obese. So in that case, as ruling out the other problems, we can start with the withdrawal bleeding and tell them to start with the low dose OCP for a regular bleeding. So that is important.
Shall I start with the next question? Yes. What is the obese and lean? What are obese and lean PCOS, and how do their treatments differ in terms of the inositols used?
Again, madam, as I already explained that in case of obese PCOS, we are very much happy if we get an obese PCOS, because we know that the pathophysiology is very well known, the hyperinsulinemia, है ना, hyperandrogenism. But in lean PCOS, we know that the problem of that fat, the adiposity, and hyperandrogenism insulin is that vicious cycle is not there. So it is a very complex thing. The lean PCOS, very difficult to treat. I have get hardly 1 or 2 patients in my life, the lean PCOS, and yes, really a difficult job. Yes, the different line of treatment is in obese. You have to add metformin, and you will definitely have the good results. But in lean PCOS, you have to have a very good counseling and followed by the proper investigations to rule out the problem. And basically, the metformin will not work in this lean PCOS. We have to go on the long-term OCP use in these patients.
Ma'am,
And
doesn't
other,
it increase insulin sensitivity, metformin? So shouldn't it be used also in lean PCOS?
no, it is not very much helpful, I have seen in these patients. So this is my experience. But yes, most of us start with the metformin. But I don't think, in my experience, yes, the lean PCOS is still an challenging task for me.
What is the
So,
role of steroids in cases of lean PCOS?
I don't think there is any role of steroids. No, we should not use steroids in any of these patients. Never.
Companies are coming with two types of inositol preparations with different ratio of chiro and D-inositol. So what does that make a sense to you?
We can't hear you, ma'am.
Dr. Sangeeta, please unmute yourself.
Yeah, actually metformin has many side effects. Okay, so they have brought these combinations, and because that the pathway of pathophysiology of glucose uptake and the serine phosphorylation, actually this complex pathway that is broken by this fixed ratio of dichironostol and minostal. So they help, and I do use this combinations, and yes, it is very much effective. So I find this combination much better than metformin in my practice, with a better patient compliance and the lesser side effects. But when you send these patients to your endocrinologist, they will give you metformin. They don't like this drug. But as an obstetrician and gynecologist, I do have a favor for this combinations. So it may
Are you
differ.
using two different type of inositols ratios for two different types of PCOS?
Yes, because of the uptake mechanism. I have told you that pathophysiology, that slide, this decarnostal and minoristol, their combination, that 40:1 ratio, They, yes, basically block the vicious pathophysiology and increase the uptake of the glucose in the tissues and inhibit the gluconeogenesis pathway. So this combination is very much effective. So they have brought out this.
Okay, right. So next question, which OCP and the content? So what should be the estrogen content in the OCPs that we are using for the PCO patients?
Always, if the patient is adults and young patients, always start with the low dose. The low dose isn't meant 15 microgram, it is 20 to 25, not more than that. Okay, and always drosperinone containing progesterone is much better. We know that.
Because it is less
Yeah,
androgenic.
yeah, yeah.
So we always start with this drosperinone containing rather than the first generation
Yes,
progesterone.
yes, yes.
Okay. So which OCPs do we use for acne and hirsutism? Drosperinone or cyproterone?
Always start with the drosperinone. It is also an anti-androgen, and if it is not effective for 3 to 6 months, then we can switch over to cyproterone. This is the protocol, and I think that most of us are doing this in our practice. The first line, you should never go with the cyproterone. Always drosperinone.
Very contradictory statements actually. A few months back we have a conference when corona time was not
Yeah.
there. The senior person from Delhi came and they said ki first line of treatment should be combination of cyproterone rather than drosperinone.
Always, but what I have read the guidelines, always they have told that cyproterone acetate preparation should not be considered as a first line in PCOS patient with hirsutism. So this is whatever I have read, but yes, we all go through it again. I hope it may change, but yes, I know that the cyproterone should not be used. But if you come with some guideline, if you have some guideline, you can tell us, because the guideline never says that they should be used as a first line drug, because it has got his one of the side effects also.
May I add on?
Anushri, you want to say something?
Yeah, Anushri. Yeah.
So definitely whatever Vinita ma'am said, so 2 years back we had this, that cyproterone is the first line agent. But of lately, it is, so drosperinone and cyproterone both are anti-androgens.
Yeah.
They both are used for acne and hirsutism. The main issue is if the patient is obese or not. If the patient is obese, then she needs weight loss. So drosperinone would always be the preferred drug of choice, because cyproterone acetate has a side effect of weight gain.
Yeah.
So if patient
That
comes
may be the.
acne, hirsutism, and she is obese, then drosperinone will be the drug of choice. If she is coming with acne, hirsutism, and is not obese, then cyproterone can be the drug of choice.
Nicely clear.
Yeah,
Very
excuse me.
Yes, because they are always telling that after 6 months of the therapy in these obese PCOS, and also you are doing the cosmetic treatment for hirsutism, and even after that, the 6 months they are failed to, then you can add to cyproterone.
Excuse
So
me,
this
ma'am.
is a recommendation.
Excuse me. Ma'am, actually, I have read that drosperinone affect lipid metabolism also. So it is preferred in obese. It's a better in altered lipid profile patients.
Yeah. Always, in every PCOS investigations, we do the fasting lipid profile. So this is very much important. So depending upon that, and always I just request you all these PCOS patients need a teamwork. A teamwork should be there. Otherwise, this patient will not get benefited. Because most of us, we are doing just the treatment of either the menstrual irregularity or infertility or hyperplasia, but we are not doing the correct help with the rest of the part. That can be done by a psychotherapist also. It is much needed, and also the endocrinologist along with the dietitian. So this should be, because we all know that this is a complex process and which is affecting throughout the life. So we have to counsel in every follow-up what to do, what is her basic problem, how to deal with the problem, and the current drugs which are there. We know that there are only 4 or 5 drugs, but when to use and how to use and when to switch, yes, it is a real complex job. But yes, we should follow the recommendations so that we should not land into some trouble. And we always love our patients, always.
Okay, if after giving 4 to 6 months of drospirenone, the hirsutism has not improved, and now we want to start an anti-androgen,
Yeah.
we go for a cyproterone combination OCP, or we should go for spironolactone?
Always cyproterone.
Okay, cyproterone.
Because
Till
the
it fails?
spironolactone, you know that it has water retention problem, the problem of hyperkalemia, hyponatremia. So you have to monitor these patients. Yes. So in these patients, better to go for cyproterone always.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
Now the question, OCP for how long? Patient takes treatment from you, takes OCP 6 months. She's relieved of her oligomenorrhea. She comes back after 8 months and then she again says, I'm in the same position. You give her TOS, or if she is obese and insulin resistant, you are already given 6 months of metformin and now she's again there standing at your clinic door. What to do now?
This is a real picture we all get in our life. Very difficult to manage. But yes, I do believe that the proper the counseling, and yes, because these patients, when they start OCP, the rest of the part they forget. So then they'll end up in problem. And again, if you are using the low dose OCP, always tell them you have to continue it for 1 or 2 years. And in between, the investigations, like the side effects of OCP, we all know. So do the investigations, and yes, you continue the OCP because this is a chronic problem. So always keep in mind that when you stop this drug, you may have a problem, likely chance. So you have to again start. There is no other options, ma'am.
So how long? Can I give them for 5 years?
I think 2 years is the
2 years, maybe then even
recommendations.
if she
And
comes
then
again a third time.
Yeah, then again you have to think that what are the ovaries? What about the ovaries? Are they bulky? Are there any problems? Reinvestigates, and it's still she has a problem. Then I think that you take the help of some other team, because long term OCP is also not recommended. So 2 years is yes, and then again we have to rethink and resit and do the proper diagnosis and the history. Very much important.
Just on a funny note, I want to say that when such a patient of prolonged PCOS comes to me and she says, "Madam, meri shadi ho gayi," I become very happy because now I have to treat her for infertility and anovulation.
Once I book this patient emotionally, she should be continuous patient for at least next 15 years. So this is very much important. Your emotional bonding. And
That's true.
very difficult, very difficult. These patients, one patient is enough. Your counseling and your treatment. But yes, it is a challenging, but we get the results when the patient is a good compliant, it is educated, and the all the problems we can deal nicely. And yes, we get all the problems of infertility or the other side effects. But some of the PCOS are very resistant PCOS, so in this case we'll end up into problems. So we just refer to the higher center or endocrinologist in these cases, that there may other hyperandrogenism factor we need to evaluate, because we are continuously giving OCP, think that ovary is a problem. There may be other problem. So again, stopping this drug for 3 months and again reinvestigate. So again, I'm telling you, all of you, that when you start the next cycle, after prolonged treatment of OCP, stop for at least 3 to 4 months and then do the investigations. Otherwise, there will be no result from the investigations. So this is important.
Okay. The next one, few years back, we were studying that clomiphene is the drug of choice for ovulation induction in PCOS. And now we hear that Letrose 2018 guidelines and 19 guidelines, that Letrose is the best because it gives best live birth rates. Are there any other reasons for considering Letrose to be better?
I use both CC and Letrose in both these patients. I think, yes, guideline prefer Letrozole because I think that endometrial thickness is one of the issue. Otherwise, the mechanism of action is almost the same. And the monofollicular development is more in Letrozole. And in clomiphene, there may be chances of hyperstimulation because of the patients. That's why I think the Letrozole is preferred. Otherwise, there's no much difference.
Okay. Does PCOS affect the quality of oocytes in IVF?
Yes, of course, I think, but I am not an IVF specialist, so I will not be able to give this answer. I think
Okay,
some
yes,
of
it does.
the IVF specialists can give this answer because I'm in BHU and still we are struggling for the IVF lab and this facility. So yes, we are lagging behind that.
Then I must
And
tell
in
you
this
that
corona,
it does. It does.
yeah, thank you. Yes, it does. I
So
know, but research is there. But the basic pathophysiology, I don't know. But the problem is there for these patients.
there have been patients in whom the AMH
Yeah, I would
report
like to
came
say,
to be 30 and even 60 after some time. So have you ever seen such a high AMH in PCOS patient, and what does this imply?
If there's a high AMH in PCOS patients, definitely see
To
the
the
case of
extent of 30 and 60.
30 and 60. It depends upon lab to lab. There's a lab variations also, and
no,
the
30.
AMH values differ on the cycle also. Previously, they were saying that AMH is constant all throughout the cycle. But when you do it in proliferative phase, when you do in the secretory phase, the AMH is different. So I never get this high 30. I have got 15 or 16 in many of our patients. But yes, this is a full blown case of PCOS typical, and better to correlate with the transvaginal ultrasound measurement. So we'll get like necklace pattern and that picture. So this will correlate much with the AMH, the antral follicle count.
Answering this questionnaire, I would ask the participants who are online if they have any questions to participate and be happy to ask. We'll be happy to answer.
And as an IVF, and that is most important, always use antagonist protocol, always, and
Antagonist, freeze off.
freeze all the embryos. That is more important. Otherwise, we'll land up in
Yeah, I would like to
OHSS.
speak, Dr. Neelam.
Pardon? हाँ Ritu Bhabi, okay. Can you unmute Dr. Ritu?
Yes. Yeah. You wanted to know whether the quality of the oocytes differ in case of IVF. Yes, I think there is some difference in the oocytes of an PCOS and oocytes in normal ovaries, what we see. But a lot matters how you stimulate this PCOS also. So the quality of oocytes is generally bit less than a normal picture, normal ovaries in of other patients. That's what I've seen.
Okay, fine. Any other questions or suggestions from the members?
Yeah, one question. I don't know whether related to PCOS or not. Many patient come to us with complaint of scanty menses or secondary amenorrhea, and on investigation everything is normal. Then what is that? That is also PCOS or something else? And what should we proceed for their management, or how to counsel them? How many times periods would be there in a year or so? That is my question.
First of all, yes, you have to just follow the basic protocol, do the withdrawal, exclude the pregnancy, do the withdrawal bleeding, and do the investigations. And the investigation will tell you that he's a PCOS patient.
Investigations are normal. All profiles are normal, but
Every
patient
Gen-
doesn't have periods for 2 months or 3 months, and this is going on. Many patients are coming nowadays for oligomenorrhea or secondary amenorrhea, but they doesn't have any clinical picture of PCOS. Anything there is just
No clinical, no biochemical, nothing.
nothing.
And hyper.
But many patients
Okay.
are coming like this. So what
So,
should be the reason? Only lifestyle modification is the answer, or something else?
and what about the endometrium?
Many patients are unmarried or by
Okay.
TAS normal endometrium. Like nothing
Generally,
significant,
can I
but
interrupt?
they doesn't have regular menses.
Okay. These young patients.
Young
So,
or fertile age group or completed their family, many patients we are encountering here. I think all of you are agree.
Yeah. Sometimes follicular cysts can be seen in such patients. Development of simple follicular cysts, and it is the cause of scanty menses in many cases. Just simple cyst development occur if you see on ultrasound in patients with scanty menses or amenorrhea or
If you just follow lifestyle and weight reduction, there are so many adolescents, even children of our friends. You just tell them to decrease their weight and they significantly improve. That's what I have seen.
It means lifestyle modification is the only answer.
Is the only answer.
and I do
No,
start
it-
some Ayurvedic treatment. In these cases, if everything is normal, the counseling is important and let them give some time. And the stress in these girls, the stress is one of the factor because the
even
stress
giving
of
OCPs can improve the even giving some OCPs can also
Yes.
improve the cycle.
Yes, the OCP is yes one of the answer. But if this patient is not a PCOS, then also I'm telling you that there's hypothalamic the problems. The hypothalamic amenorrhea, the problem in the cycles is one of the major effect. The stress is one of our major patient has this problem, and I've investigated thoroughly. Every time she comes to the scanty menses and endometrium is 3 to 4 millimeter. Okay, and she bleeds two or three in a month, in 3 or 4 in one time. So these patients they have the problem of the competitions and their stress in their job. So I have, and also when I talk to her personally, privately, I told her mother to go out of my chamber. Then she just tell me everything, what is the problem in the family, everything. And yes, it's a really nightmare to treat these girls, because if you tell that yes, you don't do this, yeah, learn something, do some exercise, uh, hear some good music. This is not the way. This is a long run treatment, long run counseling. Yes, you start with the OCP, this will help, but this stress you have to rule out. And the body mass index. If she's very lean and thin, because a proper body mass index is very much important for a woman to bleed. So most of the girls, they are very lean and thin. Okay, so they will not bleed because of the hypothalamic separation and the less GnRH pulses. So we have to see that part also. And when you are going for the reproductive age group, again, because if they are patient are PCOS, all the ovaries, the follicles, they are getting wasted. So they will be a case of premature ovarian failure. So again, you have to light up these things, and proper investigations and follow up is very much important. And yes, always add OCP, cyclical OCP. They will bleed, and then there will be no harm in starting the OCP along with the other counseling. This is the thing I want to emphasize on.
एक साल में मिनिमम कितनी बार पीरियड्स होना चाहिए?
The PCOS के लिए तो 8 से ज्यादा होना चाहिए.
PCOS छोड़ दीजिए. एज
हाँ.
एक पेशेंट आया और हम उसे काउंसिल कर रहे हैं और मैं उसको जब वो बार बार OCPs ले लेके थक गई, मैं भी ट्रीटमेंट करके थक गई, तो मुझे क्या बोलना चाहिए कि एक साल में 5-6 बार भी आए तो चलेगा?
काउंसलिंग के लिए आप जरूर बोलो, बिकॉज पेशेंट तो बहुत स्ट्रेस में है, बट यस मिनिमम 9 to 10 तो होना ही चाहिए, 9 to 10 तो होना ही चाहिए, क्योंकि फिर आपका लाइन ट्रीटमेंट चेंज हो जाएगा. इट इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट, बट यस यू शुड बी सपोर्टिव टू द पेशेंट कि नहीं तुम्हारा इतना कम है, ये ठीक नहीं है, आपको पता है कि कम है, लेकिन यस जस्ट काउंसलर, so it will go in the long run. It's very difficult. What I am saying is a different thing, but yes, it's we do get these patients, and our patients, and the follow up and the counseling and patient compliance, everything has got role in treating these patients.
आपको क्या लगता है डॉक्टर संगीता, पीसीओएस कभी ठीक होता है?
कभी नहीं, कभी नहीं, नेवर. बेटर होता है, ठीक कभी नहीं होता है,
ठीक कभी नहीं होता है,
कभी नहीं होता है. I have seen these patients. I have seen.
वेरी ट्रू.
Other questions?
एंड आपसे बस हमें ये पूछना था कि एवरी वन ऑफ यू आर डूइंग लैप्रोस्कोपिक
Drilling?
operations? Yes, no drilling, laparoscopic operations you are all doing, but what about your experience with drilling?
We take it as a last resort.
Previously, this was the first line of when this PCOS was emerging. Then the ovarian drilling was in very much in. So that time we did as a first line, but now is last resort.
That is most important, because the guideline says that we should not use, because it will do more harm than good.
Yeah.
And always, especially in reproductive age group, when you are doing the ovulation induction and for 6 cycles, you are not getting the result, either CC failure or CC resistant cases, then you go for the ovarian drilling. Or the patient is very much obese, or the ovaries are very much bulky. So again, the last resort, as madam has told. So this
I
is
think
very much
bulky
important.
ovaries can be an indication. However, doing 4 holes in each ovary, I have never found a response.
But the recommendation
never
says that
ovulate itself.
ideal is 4 to 6 holes, not more than that, which should be
Yeah.
4 millimeter in depth. है ना? That is
Yeah.
important
That is the last
for 4 seconds. Yeah.
I just want to say one more thing. Ki, although the PCOS remain behind other people in terms of health, do they have an edge in terms of older age when, because of more amount of eggs, do they have a menopause late? Do they have more time to stay young as compared to other people?
No, most of these patients, they have a decrease, they are going to for decrease ovarian reserve, because every cycle, the more number of follicles are recruited. Okay, but they are not maturing. They are anovulatory cycles. So their follicles are more going into atresia as compared to the normal ovulatory woman. So chance of POF or decreased ovarian reserve is much more when they go beyond 35.
Yeah.
So there's no comparison.
I
The
want to
aging,
ask one thing.
ovarian aging is much higher, actually more advanced in these patients.
Ma'am, in one of your slides, you mentioned exercise between 7 year to 64 year of age.
18 years to 64 years.
Yeah, so how can PCOS, what picture we get in 60 plus women in cases of PCOS?
These women,
I was not able to understand that sentence, ki exercise for 7 to 64. Menopause, I understand. Ki,
that is not for the endometrium. That is basically for the other metabolic problems. We all
okay,
know that
that's not
cardiovascular,
particularly
insulin
for
res- yeah, that is not for that.
okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, all the participants and our wonderful speaker who answered each and every question. Like
Thank you.
we had we had prepared so many questionnaires. There were so many doubts. Neelam ma'am, you conducted the questionnaire so well, and ma'am, you answered them.
Thank you so much. My pleasure, Anushri. Because yes, it is one of my favorite topic, and yes, I really enjoyed with all of you. And basically, we discussed, and I also learned some new things. So this is a very good webinar for me too. and I hope we will meet again in near future.
Now, in the end, I would like respected Dr. Poonam Kumar ma'am to please give a vote of thanks.
Dr. Poonam Kumar is hot babes of our Saharanpur Obs Gynae Society.
Vanita, that is enough.
No man. आपको इतने दिन बाद तंग करने का मौका मिला है मुझे.
It's been a delightful learning experience. Dr. Sangeeta, honestly, you were so good, so patient, so thorough. And this topic really, it just goes on and on and on. And our new team has just come in. Dr. Neelam was great. Anushri, of course, both of them looking so bloody glamorous. So good, very good. There's something to look forward to when you have a Zoom meeting. You want to see some nice style also. So Dr. Sangeeta, we are very, very happy that you were here. And we hope to see you again. And all our members, thank you so much for joining in. Neelam, Anushri, you all were great. Vanita, great, absolutely. Thank you, all of you.
Poonam ma'am.
Yeah.
Vinita ma'am's background.
Yes, we can all change that. Whoever has their own kids with them will change it. My kids are not here.
Yeah, that's so true.
Yes, that's true. I know.
Okay. On a lighter note, thank you all. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Stay fit and healthy. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.